Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we are tackling one of the biggest, most powerful ideas in all of American history, the American dream. You know, it's a phrase we hear all the time, but what does it actually mean? Well, its meaning has been fought over, celebrated, and torn apart for almost 100 years.
To really get this, we've got to go back to the very beginning, to the guy who literally wrote the book on it. That's historian James Truslow Adams, who coined the phrase way back in 1931. And what might surprise you is just how idealistic he was. See, for him, it wasn't about mansions and high wages. It was this bigger, richer vision for a society where every single person could reach their absolute fullest potential.
So, here's how we're going to break this all down. We'll look at how the myth was born, how it got challenged in literature. Then we'll ask the tough question of who it was actually for, dig into the hard data, and finally, see what the dream looks like today.
All right, first up, where in the world did this massive idea even come from? Because, it didn't just pop up out of nowhere.
The key thing to remember about Adams's original idea is that it was deeply social. He was basically taking a shot at the old, rigid class systems of Europe. He imagined a new deal, right? A place where your talent and your hard work, not who your parents were, decided how far you could go. It was about becoming who you were meant to be, not just about getting rich.
And Adams was tapping into something that was already in the air. This idea had roots, It pulled from that rugged, individualistic spirit of the frontier thesis, this belief that you could go west and start over. And of course, it was tied up in the incredible promise of the Statue of Liberty, which for millions of immigrants was a symbol of a whole new life. Adams just gave this feeling a name.
Okay, but almost as soon as this ideal was put into words, you had artists and writers looking at it and saying, hang on a second. They started to see the cracks in the whole thing, especially on the stage.
And what's so fascinating is how two of the most legendary characters in American literature basically embody the two great failures of the dream. You've got Jay Gatsby, who shows that even if you get all the money in the world, it can leave you totally empty and alone. And then you have Willy Loman, just an ordinary guy who is completely crushed by the weight of a dream he can never, ever achieve.
So really, both The Great Gatsby and Death of a Salesman were throwing a huge wrench in this core idea. They were asking, what if hard work isn't enough? What if chasing this dream, especially the materialistic version, actually leads you down a path of illusion, moral rot, and total self-destruction? This all leads us to a really critical question, maybe the most important one of all, and one that those early stories didn't always ask. Was this dream ever actually meant for everybody?
Well, for a huge part of the population, the answer has always been a clear no. The writer Ta-Nehisi Coates puts it powerfully in his book Between the World and Me. He argues that for Black Americans, the dream wasn't just hard to reach, it was a complete mirage that was actually built on keeping them out.
And this really gets to the heart of the critique. The very structure of American society was segregated from day one. The incredible wealth that made the dream possible for so many was in fact built on the backs of enslaved Black Americans. Coates points out that even the word people in the founding documents wasn't meant to include Black people. So the dream for the dreamers, as he calls them, was only possible because of what was taken from others.
Okay, so we've heard the critiques from literature and social commentary. But what happens when you try to measure the American dream? What do the cold, hard numbers say? Well, recently, economists have done just that, and let me tell you, the story the data tells is pretty shocking.
Take a look at this number. According to a huge study by economist Raj Chetty, 90% of kids born in 1940 grew up to earn more money than their parents. That's kind of the definition of the American dream, right? 90%?
Now brace yourself. For kids born in the 1980s, that number completely collapses to just 50%, a literal coin flip. It's no wonder researchers have a name for this, the fading American dream. That's a massive drop in what they call absolute income mobility.
You can actually see this pretty clearly in a chart called the Great Gatsby curve. It basically shows that the more unequal a country's income is, the less social mobility it has. And the relationship is crystal clear. Countries with high inequality like the US make it much harder for you to climb the ladder. Your parents' income becomes a much bigger factor in your own success. So here's the kicker from all that research. The main problem isn't that the economy stopped growing. The pie got bigger. The problem is how that bigger pie was sliced up. A much, much larger piece went to a tiny group at the very top, which mathematically just made it harder for everyone else to get ahead of where their parents started.
So, after all that, the flawed beginnings, the history of exclusion, the tough data, where does that leave the American dream now, in the 21st century?
Well, the whole conversation has started to change.
What's really telling is how you see this play out in modern movies. You get a film like The Pursuit of Happiness, which is all about how noble the struggle is. The fight itself is the heroic part. But then you get a movie like The Wolf of Wall Street, which shows success as this totally corrupting force, where making it means becoming greedy and morally bankrupt.
And that pretty much sums up the big shift. The conversation isn't just, can you still achieve the American dream anymore? Now it's more like, even if you can, what's the cost? Is that old school version of the dream, the one all about massive wealth, even a good thing to be chasing anymore? And that leaves us with one last big question to think about. From that original vision of a fair and just society all the way to today's debate about its moral cost, the American dream was never just one thing. It's always been changing, always being reinvented. So if the old version is unraveling, you and I have to ask, what new dream should we build to take its place?